The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the bustling streets of the empire's capital. In the midst of this city, filled with noise and life, a quiet figure stood at the entrance of the emperor's palace. He had been summoned, and the reason was unknown to him. His heart raced as he crossed the grand stone steps that led to the palace doors. This was not just any summon. The emperor never called anyone without purpose. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with silence. The marble floors gleamed under the soft light from the towering windows. Guards lined the walls, their eyes fixed, as if they too were waiting for something. And then, there he was, the emperor, sitting on his throne, a figure of authority and wisdom. His eyes, sharp and calculating, never left the young man standing before him. "You have been chosen." The emperor's voice echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a question but a statement, as if there was no other possible answer. "The task I give you is not simple. It requires strength, patience, and understanding." The young man swallowed, unsure of what to say. He had heard rumors about the emperor's strange decisions, but this felt different. He wasn't the son of nobility or a well-known warrior. He was just an ordinary person, pulled from the shadows of the empire. Why him? "The daughters," the emperor continued, his voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier. "I have tasked you with their training. You must teach them what it means to be human." The young man blinked, his mind struggling to process the words. Teach them what? The emperor's gaze softened for a brief moment, a flicker of something that could almost be mistaken for sorrow. "They are not like you. They come from a place far beyond this realm, where emotions and bonds are foreign concepts. It is your duty to show them humanity in all its forms, its love, its pain, its strength." The young man's head spun. What did he mean? They weren't like him. And why had the emperor chosen him of all people? Was this some kind of test, a challenge for a reward he could not yet comprehend? "Understand this," the emperor said, standing up and walking slowly toward the young man. "This is not a mission for glory. This is a mission for survival. They carry the future of our world in their hands. The knowledge you give them will shape the world for generations to come. Your role is more important than you can possibly imagine." Before the young man could respond, the emperor gave a nod, signaling for the guards to bring in his daughters. The doors opened, and in walked 3 young women, each dressed in robes that shimmered like liquid silver. Their faces were beautiful, but their eyes held something that made the young man's stomach twist, something deep and unsettling. As if they had seen more than any human should, the emperor's voice was steady as he spoke. "This is your charge. Teach them well. Humanity's future depends on you." As the doors closed behind the emperor and his daughters, the young man stood frozen in place, his mind racing. He had no idea what he had just stepped into. But one thing was clear: the world as he knew it was about to change forever. The young man stood in the vast, dimly lit hall, his heart pounding in his chest. The emperor had given him a task, a duty that he had no idea how to fulfill. The 3 daughters stood before him, their presence both elegant and intimidating. They were silent, their expressions unreadable. Their eyes locked on him with a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through him. He took a hesitant step forward, trying to steady himself. He had never been around women like this, so regal, so composed. Each one of them seemed to have an air of something ancient, as though they had witnessed countless worlds and ages, far beyond anything his simple mind could comprehend. The eldest, with long silver hair that shimmered like moonlight, took a step closer. Her movements were fluid, almost ethereal. Her eyes, an unnatural shade of violet, glowed faintly in the dim light, giving her an almost otherworldly presence. "You're our guide?" she asked, her voice soft, but with an edge of something sharp, something that hinted at power. He nodded, unsure of how to respond. I suppose so." The second daughter, her hair a deep shade of emerald green, stepped forward with a slight smile, though it did little to ease the tension in the room. "Tell us, human," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. "What does it mean to be human?" Her tone was mocking, but her eyes were sincere, as if she genuinely sought an answer. The youngest, a girl with hair like a burning sunset and a gaze that seemed to flicker like flames, remained silent, watching him with intense interest. She seemed more withdrawn, but there was a quiet force about her that made it impossible to ignore her. The young man felt a wave of unease wash over him. How could he explain what it meant to be human? He was just an ordinary person, raised in a world that wasn't nearly as grand or mysterious as theirs. What could he possibly teach them about the things he himself barely understood? He swallowed hard and spoke, his voice tentative but growing stronger with each word. To be human, it's not about power or strength. It's about connection, emotions, relationships, the bonds we share with others. We experience joy and sorrow, love and pain. It's these feelings that make us who we are. The eldest daughter tilted her head slightly, studying him with those strange, glowing eyes. Love, she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. Sorrow, pain, we do not know these things. We were created with purpose, but never for these. Emotions, the young man felt a knot form in his stomach. He had no idea what he was getting into, but it was clear that these daughters of the emperor had never been exposed to the complexities of humanity. They were like blank slates, with the potential to shape the world, but only if they could learn the very essence of what it meant to be human. Teach us, the youngest spoke, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable force. Teach us to feel. The words hit him like a wave. It was one thing to show them the human world, to explain its ways, but to teach them to feel? He wasn't sure if he was capable of such a thing. The eldest daughter stepped forward, her voice low but firm. We are ready. We are waiting for you to guide us. Show us what it means to truly be human. With those words, the weight of his task became clear. The future of humanity rested in his hands. How could he teach them everything they needed to know? How could he make them understand something so deep, so complicated, and so human? As the three daughters watched him, waiting for his next move, the young man realized one thing. This was no ordinary mission. This was a journey that would change him, and them, forever. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and discovery. The young man quickly learned that teaching the emperor's daughters what it meant to be human was no simple task. Each day, they challenged him in ways he had never imagined, forcing him to look deeper into his own life, his own experiences, and his understanding of the world around him. At first, they seemed to lack any real understanding of human emotions. They watched him with wide, almost childlike eyes, absorbing everything he said. But they couldn't grasp the depth of the feelings that made people act the way they did. When he tried to explain love, they asked him to show them, but how could he? Love wasn't something that could be shown through words or actions alone. It was a bond, a connection that was felt in the heart, something impossible to define. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the palace grounds, the young man found the eldest daughter, the one with silver hair, sitting by herself on a balcony. Her violet eyes stared out over the city, but her face was unreadable, as if she were lost in thoughts far beyond her years. Do you understand now? He asked softly, approaching her carefully. She didn't turn to look at him, but her voice came out in a whisper. I understand that there is more to humans than I imagined, but I do not understand why you feel so strongly about things that cause pain. Why do you continue to love when it brings suffering? Why do you hold on to something that can hurt you so much? He sat beside her, the weight of her question hanging in the air. It was a question he had asked himself many times, but never quite in those words. He thought for a moment before responding. Love isn't just about happiness, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. It's about connection, about sharing your life with someone, no matter what happens. Even when it hurts, it's worth it. Because, in the end, love teaches us something we couldn't learn any other way. It teaches us who we are. She remained silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The young man could see that she was deep in thought, processing his words in ways that only she could understand. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I think I am beginning to understand, but there is still much I need to learn. There is a part of me that feels something new when you speak of love. It is like a spark, but I do not know what to do with it. He smiled, feeling a small glimmer of hope. Maybe they weren't as far from understanding as he had thought. The next few days were spent in a flurry of activities. The daughters began to explore the city, seeking out new experiences to help them understand humanity. They witnessed laughter, arguments, moments of kindness, and moments of sorrow. They observed families, strangers, and lovers, trying to piece together what made humans so complex. But it wasn't enough. No matter how much they observed, something was still missing. One night, after another long day of exploration, the youngest daughter, the one with the fiery hair, approached him with an intensity that was both unsettling and mesmerizing. "There's something I do not understand," she said, her voice a mix of frustration and curiosity. "Why do humans make choices that they know will cause them pain? Why do they sacrifice themselves for others? Why do they act against their own well-being for the sake of someone else?" The question struck him hard. He had never thought about it in such simple terms. Yet it was something that had always been a part of him. Because, he began, sometimes the greatest strength lies in choosing others over yourself. It's not always about avoiding pain or hardship. It's about knowing that what you do, your actions, your love can make a difference in someone else's life. The fiery-haired daughter gazed at him, her eyes burning with a new understanding. I think I am starting to understand what it means to be human," she whispered, more to herself than to him. As the days passed, the young man began to see changes in them. They were no longer the detached, cold beings they had once seemed. They laughed now, in genuine moments of joy. They cried, too, not out of weakness, but because they were beginning to feel the weight of the world's emotions. And in turn, he found himself changing as well. He was no longer just teaching them. He was learning from them too. Their questions, their curiosity, their hunger for knowledge, it was awakening something inside him. Something he hadn't realized he had lost. The task that had once seemed so impossible was slowly beginning to take shape. And as the days turned into weeks, the young man realized that he wasn't just teaching them about humanity. They were teaching him about something he had never fully understood: the depth of his own humanity. The young man had never imagined that a task so simple in words could be so overwhelming in reality. As the days passed, he began to notice subtle changes in the emperor's daughters, changes that left him both amazed and unsettled. They were evolving, becoming more than he had ever anticipated. It was as if, with each passing day, they were absorbing the very essence of humanity, and yet they were still distant, still incomplete in their understanding of the most fundamental truths. One evening, as they sat in the garden, the youngest daughter, her fiery hair now softened by the glow of the setting sun, spoke up. "I feel different," she said, her voice low and uncertain, as if testing the words. "There is something inside me, something I cannot explain. When I look at you, I feel a connection, but I don't understand what it means. Why do I feel this way?" The young man felt his heart skip a beat. This was at the moment he had been waiting for. "That feeling," he said, turning to face her, "is called empathy. It's the ability to feel what others feel. It's what allows you to connect with others, to understand their pain and their joy. It's what makes us human." She frowned, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Empathy. But why do we need it? We can understand facts, we can learn, but why must we feel what others feel?" He sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Because it's what makes us care. Without empathy, we wouldn't have the drive to help others. It's what drives us to love, to protect, to sacrifice. It's what gives meaning to our lives." The eldest daughter, her silver hair now streaked with the faintest hint of gray, had been quietly listening. She spoke now, her voice soft but firm. "But what if empathy causes suffering? What if it makes us weak, vulnerable to others' pain?" He shook his head slowly. "Empathy doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. It allows you to stand with others, to share their burdens. In a world where everyone is focused on themselves, empathy is the one thing that can bring people together." They sat in silence for a moment, each of them processing his words. The youngest daughter, her face still troubled, finally looked up. "I understand, but there is still so much we do not know. There is so much about humanity that we cannot grasp." The young man nodded. "I can't teach you everything, but I can show you. I can help you experience it for yourself." And so they did. Over the next few days, they began to dive deeper into the complexities of human life. They visited the market, watching people bargain and argue over goods, witnessing moments of joy as children played, and of sorrow as an old woman cried over the loss of a loved one. They observed a family reunited after a long separation, the tears and laughter flowing freely between them, but still, there was something missing. No matter how much they observed, no matter how much they learned, it seemed that something essential eluded them. The connection between human beings, the way they could love and hate, build and destroy. All at once, how could they understand such a paradox? One night, as the stars glittered overhead, the eldest daughter spoke again, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "We have learned much, but there is still so much to discover. Why do humans choose to sacrifice themselves for others? Why do they fight for causes they may never see the end of?" He thought for a moment, the weight of her question pressing down on him. Sometimes it's not about the end. It's about the journey. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. It's about making a difference, no matter how small. She nodded slowly, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. "And that is what makes you human. Your ability to act without knowing the outcome, to believe in something greater than yourselves." The youngest daughter, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke, her voice filled with determination. "We are starting to understand, but it feels like we are only scratching the surface. There is so much more to you, to us, to this world." The young man smiled, a small glimmer of hope flickering in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they were ready to grasp the most elusive of human qualities, the ability to live in uncertainty, to embrace the unknown and still keep moving forward. But there was still so much more to teach, so much more to explore, and he realized, as he looked into their eyes, that this journey, his journey with the Emperor's daughters, was far from over. It had only just begun. The world outside the palace had shifted in ways the young man could barely comprehend. As the days passed, the Emperor's daughters continued to change, growing more attuned to the human emotions they had once struggled to understand. But with this transformation came an overwhelming burden, a responsibility that now weighed heavily on them all. The young man realized that what began as a simple task of teaching had evolved into something much more profound. One afternoon, as a violent storm raged outside, the young man found the eldest daughter alone in the library, her fingers tracing the pages of an ancient book. The crackle of lightning illuminated her features, casting shadows that made her look both angelic and otherworldly. Her violet eyes flickered with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "We've seen so much," she said, her voice a whisper against the sound of the storm. "But we still don't understand why humans hurt each other. Why do they destroy what they love? Why does the world seem to be in constant chaos?" He sat beside her, feeling the weight of her question press down on him. "The world is broken, yes, but it's also beautiful. Humanity has its flaws, its darkness, but it also has its light. And the light, it comes from the choices we make." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Choices, but how do you choose? How do you know if your choice will lead to suffering or to salvation?" The young man sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you just have to trust that your heart will lead you in the right direction. It's not always about knowing the outcome. It's about believing in the journey." She sat back, her eyes searching his face as if she were trying to decode the very essence of his soul. "And what if the journey brings more pain than peace? What if the cost of living as a human is too great?" He paused, his thoughts drifting to all the moments of heartache he had experienced: loss, betrayal, confusion. There had been times when it felt as though the weight of the world had been too much to bear. The cost of being human is great, yes, but it's also what makes us who we are. It's our ability to keep going, even when it feels impossible. The pain we experience shapes us, teaches us, and makes us stronger. Without it, we would never understand the depth of joy, of love, or of hope. She looked at him, her gaze softer now, as if the idea of pain had become something she could understand, something she could feel. In the days that followed, the daughters began to open up in ways they never had before. They shared their own experiences, bits and pieces of their past lives, their struggles, their silent longing for something they couldn't name. They weren't just learning about humanity anymore. They were beginning to embody it. The youngest daughter, who had always been quiet, now spoke more often, her voice filled with conviction. "I never understood why humans fight for what seems so fleeting," she said one night. her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire. "But I think I understand now. It's because even the smallest moments are worth fighting for. Even the briefest flash of happiness can be enough to change everything." The words struck the young man deeply. He hadn't realized how much he had come to rely on their perspective, how much their evolving understanding of humanity had shaped his own view of the world. But as the daughters grew closer to their understanding of human emotions, their powers grew stronger, and with it came a realization this transformation was not just about them. It was about something far greater. The Emperor's plan was becoming clearer, and with it, a weighty truth. They were not just learning to be human for their own sake. They were being prepared for something monumental. The youngest daughter, who had once seemed so distant, now looked at him with a newfound intensity. "You have shown us what it means to be human," she said softly. "But we are more than that. We carry something within us, something powerful. And now we must use that power. We must protect what we have learned." The young man's heart quickened. He had known this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to feel so heavy, so filled with the unknown. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We are ready," she replied. "The future is in our hands, and it is time for us to return what we have learned to shape the world, to protect it, and to give it the chance to heal." The weight of her words sank deep into his chest. They had come so far, and now they stood on the precipice of something greater than any of them could have anticipated. The Emperor's daughters had transformed, and in doing so, they had unlocked a power that could change everything. But with that power came a new question. Were they ready to face the responsibility that awaited them? And as the storm raged on outside, the young man realized that the real journey was just beginning. The next few days felt like a blur. The weight of what had transpired settled heavily on the young man's shoulders. He had seen the Emperor's daughters change in ways he never thought possible. But now he was faced with the undeniable truth: they were ready to take on the responsibility of the future. The world, as fragile as it seemed, was in their hands. And with this realization came the terrifying knowledge that their journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The youngest daughter, whose fiery hair seemed to burn with a new intensity, was the first to approach him. She stood in the quiet hall, her eyes no longer filled with confusion, but with a certainty that left him breathless. "We have learned what we needed to learn," she said, her voice steady. "But there is something more. The future. It's not just about knowledge. It's about action. We cannot simply stand by and watch. We must do something with what we have learned." Her words echoed in his mind, stirring something deep inside him. He had always thought that knowledge alone could change the world, but now he saw that it was only part of the equation. Knowledge without action was hollow, meaningless. It was the choices they made, the risks they took, that would truly define humanity's future. As if on cue, the eldest daughter, her once calm demeanor now tinged with an edge of determination, joined them. "We know now what it means to be human, to live with the burden of both joy and sorrow. We understand love, loss, and pain. But what we don't understand is how to use that to save what's left of this world." Her words were like a hammer striking the young man's chest. He had thought that their task was just to understand humanity. But now he realized the deeper truth: their mission was not just about understanding. It was about changing the course of history. "You don't need to understand everything," he said quietly, his voice filled with the weight of the moment. "You need to act. Do what feels right, even if the outcome is uncertain. You've learned that human strength doesn't come from knowledge alone. It comes from doing, from taking that first step, even when the path ahead is unclear." The youngest daughter nodded slowly, her fiery gaze meeting his. "We have the power to change things," she said, her voice filled with an unwavering resolve. "And now we must." The eldest daughter stepped forward, her eyes sharp as she looked at him. "But we will not do it alone. You will help us. You have guided us to this point, and now it is your turn to help us shape the future." He felt the weight of her words settle over him. They had come so far, but the hardest part was yet to come. They were no longer just a group of strangers learning about humanity. They were the bearers of its future, and the responsibility of that future lay with them all. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a soft light on the palace grounds, the young man knew that everything was about to change. The journey ahead would not be easy. and it would be filled with challenges that no one could foresee. But one thing was certain: the world would never be the same again. The Emperor's daughters had become something more than human. They had become the hope of humanity's future, and together they would change the course of destiny. The days had turned into weeks, and the young man felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The Emperor's daughters had become more than just students. They had become powerful, driven beings, capable of shaping the future in ways no one had ever anticipated. But the time had come for the final decision. The choice they had all feared, yet knew was inevitable, had arrived. As he stood by the edge of the palace balcony, the vast city sprawled out before him. The realization hit him hard. They had reached the end of their journey. No more lessons, no more guidance. It was time for them to act. The Emperor's daughters, once strangers to humanity's deepest emotions, had now come to embody them. They had become the embodiment of love, pain, hope, and sacrificed the very essence of what made humans who they were. But now, they had to take the next step. The world was broken, fractured by decades of conflict and destruction. The future of humanity depended on their actions, on the choices they made in the coming days. The eldest daughter approached him quietly, her presence almost ethereal. She had changed so much from the first day they met, and yet, she still carried that same air of mystery and strength. "We are ready," she said, her voice firm yet filled with an unmistakable vulnerability. "The knowledge is within us now. The power is within us, but we must decide how to use it." The young man turned to face her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "You've learned more than I could ever teach you. Now it's up to you. But remember, what you do next will determine everything. The world won't change overnight, and not everyone will agree with what you do. But if you believe in it, if you truly believe it's right, then don't hesitate." Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "We will not hesitate." The youngest daughter, who had always been the most uncertain, stood beside the eldest. There was a quiet resolve in her eyes now, a strength that had grown in her over time. "We understand now," she said softly. "It's not about power. It's about choosing the path that leads to something better, something more." He nodded, his heart swelling with pride for them. They were ready to face whatever came next, to take on the responsibility of the future. But there was one thing left to say, something he knew they needed to hear. "Remember," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you are not alone. You carry the hope of all humanity, but you also carry the love and the lessons we've shared together. Never forget that. It's what will guide you through the darkest times."